What advice do you have for parents mediating custody regarding final decision-making, parenting time for school nights and school mornings, and for cell phone usage? I'm going to break this down and talk about parenting time on school nights. This is an important thing for people to understand. First of all, children do as well in divorce as their parents, and this has been studied historically over and over with the same net result. If the parents are okay with the plan, those children are going to be okay with the plan, and that includes having a child changing where they're sleeping during the school nights. But the converse is true as well. When parents are not doing well with the plan, guess who else does not? And that's those children. And so, again, a case-by-case analysis of what's going on at the top level will determine what's going on at the bottom level, which would be this schedule. But the parties also need to remember this. Scientists have researched this question for decades and come up with the same answer on whether children are benefited or detrimented by virtue of school nights being switched between parents. And there is no evidence that they are. So old school thought, when we had what was called a tender years doctrine, where children were theoretically supposed to be with their mothers if they were between the ages of infancy and maybe 6 or 7 years old. I don't remember exactly. That used to be just presumed that they needed to be with their mothers the majority of the time. And that is the source of this research that's gone on. And over, decade after decade, study after study, the results have shown us that children are fine if parents are fine. Let's see. Now let's talk just a minute about final decision making, because I think this is probably the single most important decision that parents make when they are negotiating around their children and their children's schedules and educations, things like that, religious upbringing. The issue of final decision making has to be carefully crafted, and that is not necessarily a simple thing to do. There are plenty of ways to do it, but the things to remember are, what do you mean when you say someone has final decision making? If someone has just the axe that drops type of final decision making and that's the end of the discussion, that's one animal. And that animal can often make the non-decision making parent feel like they don't really matter and that perhaps they're just sort of a visitor in a child's life. But you can define final decision making to mean things like you can make an emergency decision, obviously, or you can make a decision about education, but only until we go back to mediation or only until we can talk to our judge about it, so that there is some limit on what the power actually is. And those power limitations are the details that you need to focus on. Things like switching a child midstream in school ought to be hard unless there's a really good reason, almost an emergency reason to do it. It shouldn't be something simple like, well, I like, the school colors of this team and the football team over here better than I do with this one over here. It needs to be really important. And the only way to make sure that that important decision-making can happen is with the words you use in your settlement documents. Let's talk for a minute about cell phones and children. This is tricky business. You want those children to be able to have an age-appropriate connection to the world, but age-appropriate is the problem, isn't it? That's wherein the devil's details lie. So obviously, older children should have more freedom. Younger children need to be pretty darn restricted. Everyone needs to know that most child psychologists will tell you that young children have a hard time on lengthy phone calls. And I've heard numerous times from numerous experts that a couple of minutes per year of age is about all those little ones can do. It's hard to keep their attention on electronics. As they get older, obviously you expand. But also with every age child, you're also trying to determine what level of freedom or control do we need to exercise around social media, or around contact with the other parent. It can happen that contact with the other parent during one parent's parenting time can be very disruptive to a child. If that's what's going on, we need some specific language and a special solution for that as well. How do you handle spouses who back up and offer less than they were willing to settle for earlier in the day? This is one of the most frustrating things that mediators deal with. And what we call this is jujitsu mediation or jujitsu negotiation. This is a very common problem in an abuse case. And I have learned after decades of doing this, that when I watch this start to happen, that I have much bigger questions I need to be asking at least one side of the case. And it's typically around the issue of abuse and control. So I will actually pause in my mind, the parties don't know this, but in my mind, I will pause the substantive work and dig briefly into what I think this dynamic might be, and to make sure that I feel like everybody at the table is balanced and they're in a level way. No one's going to be taken advantage of. But back to the problem of dealing with the person who has initiated jujitsu negotiation. This is very, very difficult. And in many respects, when you study negotiations that are done on a global scale with terrorist organizations or religious cults, it's much the same problem. And literally the only way to reroute this, if they don't do it of their own accord quickly, is to find something that is more important to that person than the negotiation at the table. And that might be something as simple as, is this person worried that everyone at church is about to find out what's been going on in this marriage if this case doesn't settle, because people are going to start getting subpoenas to testify? Is that a powerful enough thing to turn the thought process around for this person? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can't grasp that thing or find that thing that is more important to this person who takes this time. It's very frustrating when it happens, and it's probably only a 50-50 shot at getting it turned around. It is a common problem when you are dealing with the personality types, and there are 9 or 10 of them, but with the personality type called the competitive aggressor. And that personality type has a tendency to this because the value and the process to them is control. So you have to work hard to restore balance. You can see that this type of negotiation is a real shift of balance of power. And if you can't balance it back, then that mediation is probably over. In divorce mediations, how do you handle take it or leave it offers? I'll tell you how I handle take it or leave it offers. I ignore them. I don't mind hearing it, but it is truly meaningless to me, because no one can tell me that if you were willing to settle the case for $100, that $100.25 would not get that case settled. And so what I'm watching, though, it's important to understand what that really is and what I know I'm watching. I'm watching either the loss of control, or I'm watching emotional fatigue, or I can be watching both. Either way, I'm not going to play the game that way. I will always bring back an offer. It's not my job to cut offers off, even when I am directed by a party to do that way. Now, if someone says to me, I am through negotiating, period, that I must honor. It's my job then to call that. It's done. It's over. No one gets dragged through the negotiation process when they don't want to or refuse to. So that's a very different animal. But in terms of just telling your mediator, this is all I'm doing, take it or leave it, in that cavalier way, that's going to be ignored by a good mediator. From the perspective of a divorce mediator, is there anything that a spouse should never say to the mediator? There are some things that you should never say out loud to the mediator and probably your own lawyer, given what the circumstances are. anything involving admissions of criminal activity. There are no privileges available for criminal activity, and you have to be very careful. I do not want to know that you think you may have committed tax fraud. I will know from the numbers that I'm looking at in documents that there might be a tax fraud problem. And the problem can be handled, but that's not something that you need to be saying out loud, really probably to anyone. Lawyers will ask very carefully crafted questions. Lawyers will also choose not to ask certain questions very intentionally. The other thing that I think can color what's going on is if abuse is alleged, then I'm going to be really frank and let you know if I feel like the abuse is correctly alleged, I am going to analyze every single word that the alleged abuser tells me. And here's why. I have learned the very hard way that abusers often use really nice, sweet, polite words to stab their spouses emotionally. And here's a good example of that. In a long-term marriage with several children, who are from teenagers down, husband in that particular case was the abuser, and he had told the wife on nearly a daily basis that if she ever left him, he would make sure that she did not have those children. And of course, she had been the stay-at-home mom, and those children were her job. That was her domain. They were everything to her. So the first offer to the wife from the abusive husband was as follows. Ms. Landers, she has given up her education. She wasn't able to finish it. And she did this to work while I finished mine. And I know she's always wanted to finish this. And so here's what I would like to do. I'll take custody of the children for 4 years, and she can see them on the weekends, maybe twice a month, and she can focus on getting her degree, and I'm going to pay for that degree. Every penny of it, her supplies, the tuition, you name it, I'm going to pay for it. And as a very young mediator, I did not understand what I was watching. And I took that offer into the abused wife, who melted, and that was the end of that mediation because I couldn't help her reclaim her balance. I had fallen for his trick. And so from that point forward, anytime abuse is alleged, every single word gets parsed. Questions get asked around all offers that probably in that moment seem overly analytical for whatever offer is being made, but I made a vow, and that's probably been 20 or 22 years ago, that I would never be part of one of those traps again. In divorce mediation, how do you suggest dividing pets? I think we divide pets just like we divide children. I am a huge pet lover and mother of Mrs. Pearl Landers, who is an excellent brown dog. That's what we tell her breed is. And I can't imagine not having Pearl at least part of the time with me or half the time with me. And so when families come in and they have these pets that they've had long time, some have serious medical issues. Some, these pets are just as attached to us as they are to them. And I think they're worthy of the same level of focus. They don't need the same detailed arrangement, but you can say simple things like, every 2 days we're going to flip this puppy, or I'll keep the cat this week, you keep the cat next week, and we'll keep bouncing back and forth. There are plenty of solutions around pets. When you mediate what we call custody, which is parenting time and decision making, those types of things, how important is the parenting time status quo? I think that the parenting time status quo is a significant factor to look at. Obviously, children of a younger age could have a hard time if we suddenly craft a plan that is vastly different from what they've been doing or what they're comfortable doing. That doesn't mean you don't do it. It might be appropriate for your family, but you have to at least look at and give a nod to what's gone on historically. And that's what a judge in a divorce court is going to do as well. So that historical parenting schedule, that is our start mark. And it's a very important start mark to know exactly what's been going on and then to carefully analyze what we do moving forward. In general, from the divorce mediator's perspective, how do you handle assets valued by the parties with large differences? This is a tricky problem. Obviously, the first and easiest way to handle it is to try to get the parties to agree to a number somewhere between their numbers. They may or they may not. Most people will take charge of that. If they can't, then we back up and we use experts to address what this value is. But often what we see with experts are that they're doing the same thing the parties are. One expert's going to tell me that it's worth $1 million and the other one's going to tell me it's worth about 10 cents. And then we're going to go through that same process with the experts. But the judges are going to go through this process as well if we're not able to get your case settled. And the judges are just going to use common sense. And they're going to try to figure out between the experts or between the parties' testimonies what they think is the most reasonable value for a thing. And that's the value that they will use. And so our process is going to look very much like that as well. As a mediator, how do you know when one of the parties is a narcissist? How often is that? Is it hard to tell? My least favorite problem to solve years ago was dealing with a narcissist in mediation because it's all so self-focused and there's almost no solution with which they can't find a problem. Now, however, it's one of my favorite things to deal with because I have studied and studied and studied this personality type and how to help manage this personality type. And one of my favorite things is called the Narcissist prayer. And I love to quote this prayer when we're talking about whether or not we might be dealing with one of those in mediation. And the Narcissist prayer is this: that didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. And if it was, it's not my fault. And if it was, I didn't mean it. And if I did, you deserved it. And that sums up this personality. And that's what the mediator is going to be dealing with. I will literally go through every one of those machinations and every sentence of those poems with this person. And at about the second or third one, I know what I have on my hands. And then a well-trained mediator is going to know how to help that person find a solution and not be the obstructionist that they typically are. They also will take on what I call the perpetual victim status. Everything is somebody else's fault, and they are victimized at work and by their friends and by their family and by their spouse and by their children, and it goes on and on and on. You'll often see that element. And of course, there are a ton of elements. This is a topic of about a 4-hour seminar, but these are the bright lines of it. There are also almost always is some physical evidence of this person's decision-making and narcissistic personality in the form of text messages and emails or voicemails, because self-control is not always a strong suit. So you just have to trust, if you've chosen an experienced mediator, that they are going to know what this looks like, and they are going to know the coping tools for helping this person not get in the way of a settlement. As a mediator, how do you recommend divorce mediation with a narcissist so that the spouse of the narcissist feels like they are in control? I go through exactly what I just spoke about in terms of narcissist and the narcissist prayer so that that alleged victim knows that I know. And it does a couple of things. It helps that alleged victim see that I really can help work this puzzle because I understand the parameters of it and the tools with which to address it. But what it also does is it shows that victim, that alleged victim, that I'm not going to play around in this area. And if the victim, who has often learned some very unhealthy behaviors in order to manage their life with this narcissist, if this victim starts to execute those behaviors, I'm going to address those as well, because I can only plug so many holes in a ship before that ship sinks. And so I need this spouse not to be drilling holes while I'm trying to plug the holes the narcissist is drill. So dealing with it very upfront, and although kindly, I'm probably speaking more forcefully about it here than I would actually speak about it in an actual mediation with a victim or a narcissist, because to tee up, particularly with a narcissist, is just to guarantee yourself a battle. So I wouldn't do it in a way that that narcissist ever knew that I was going through this process in my own mind, but it would be dealt with very directly. Other recommendations for dealing with a narcissist are quite concrete. And number 2 is that we need to assemble the team early. The alleged victim of the narcissist needs a good team that knows what they're doing, that knows this personality type, and that is together early, preferably before the narcissist knows that it's even happening, so that information can be gathered very quietly before it vanishes, that sort of thing. The other thing that needs to happen, number 3, is that the alleged victim needs to learn to set some boundaries, very firm boundaries with the narcissist. And I often think about the quote from a movie, I think in the 70s or 80s, about nuclear war, where the only way to win is not to play. And dealing with negotiations with the narcissist is much like nuclear war. It can be. And the only way to win is not to play that narcissist game. You must play by the mediator's game, that they know what they're doing, but not the narcissist game, because the minute you play the game on their terms, you're dead. Number 4 is to seriously consider therapy with someone who has some expertise in the narcissistic personality. There are true rules of the road for dealing with this person. And if you have children with this person, this is someone you're going to interact with until you're in a coffin or they are in a coffin. Your children are going to have graduations, your children are going to get married, your children are going to have children. It's going to go on and on and on, and you're never going to be fully away from this person. So it's really important to train yourself to deal with this person in a healthy way, and counselors are really good ways to do that. Number 5, I believe, is to document everything. Everything. Keep every piece of paper, every text message, every email, every voicemail. If you have hit record on your cell phone during a conversation, save that, and save all of that off of your device. That needs to be securely in a lawyer's office, where when a phone disappears or a plan gets canceled or phones get wiped, that evidence is still intact. And then I think the final and the most important piece of this puzzle for the spouse of a narcissist is to hire a lawyer who knows this personality.
Suzanne, as a quick follow-up, what about seeking to flip the script on the narcissist? And every time the narcissist tries to cut a corner on your boundaries, to request some accommodation in return, to make it a quid pro quo 100% of the time. Is that something that you see could be beneficial, or are you just asking for more pain at that point?
I think that's a case-by-case basis. If you have the victim of a narcissist who has just started this journey of learning what this personality type is and what kind of trap they've been in with this personality, that's probably a dangerous maneuver, because they're not going to have the skill and emotional distance to do that. But if you have someone who's learned this like the back of their hand, they've gone to the counseling, they've got this person's number, they know the rules of the road, then that can be an extremely effective tool to use with a narcissist, because narcissists can also be quite lazy. They're only going to victimize as long as it's fun and easy. And the minute it's not fun and easy anymore, then they're on to their next victim, where it will be fun and easy again. And so you just have to judge your client based on where they are in this process.